1984 Camaro Z28 305 HO engine after 3,200 miles of use after an engine overhaul, engine replacement, and adjustment of the rockers. There was a ticking sound in the rocker lifter action, but it would go away when the oil pressure built up. The mechanic who did the final rocker adjustment said the initial noise would eventually go away, but it didn't. As can be seen in this photo, the problem only got worse, resulting in a completely loose rocker that is now out of place. After removing the intake manifold, I found the bottom piece of the number 8 cylinder intake push rod lying where you see it in the picture. The broken push rod was also bent. Evidently, the push rod jumped out of its seat in the lifter and was struck by the top rim of the lifter. This is a view of the broken push rod. My 1984 Camaro GM service manual describes how to adjust the rocker nut. You can read it in the picture, but it basically says, turn the crank on the engine until the number 1 cylinder is in top dead center. And then you can work on the specified valves and then do the adjustment. Here is a view of how a lifter is designed. Does the GM procedure make sense? The plunger is allowed to move a small amount as it compresses the plunger spring. The Chevrolet manual said 1 turn beyond 0 lash would center the plunger in its maximum travel. For my Chevy 305 small block, this centered preload distance is 60 thousandths. The threads on the Chevy rocker stud are 60 thousandths apart, so 1 turn moves the push rod into the lifter by the desired 60 thousandths of an inch. I have turned the crankshaft here to bring the number 1 cylinder to top dead center. The push rod I'm turning has no lash and the lifter is not lifting at all. The push rod cannot be jiggled up and down. The same is true for half of the push rods with their lifters at rest. The number 8 exhaust push rod has a large amount of play and movement when it's checked. The rocker can be moved also. Setting the preload of a lifter can be done without a manual or a caliper to measure amounts of plunger travel. Just make a thin strip of metal from some thin aluminum or steel. Start with a lifter that is completely down and at rest. Back off the rocker to ensure that there is no pressure on the lifter so that the plunger spring can push its plunger to the top of its travel. Then, place the strip inside the rim of the lifter and let it rest on the top of the plunger, being careful to avoid the retaining clip. At this point, use a utility knife to make a scratch on the metal gauge with the blade flush with the top of the lifter hole. Next, go to a lifter that has come up and has moved the push rod and rocker under pressure against the force of the valve spring. The plunger inside the lifter will be at the bottom of its travel with the plunger spring fully compressed. So insert the gauge as before and put a scratch on the gauge with the utility knife to mark the plunger's position at the bottom of its travel. Now, put a scratch on the gauge at the midpoint between the top and the bottom travel marks. This is where we want the plunger to be when it is properly preloaded. It turns out that on my small block Chevy engine, that the distance between the top and the bottom plunger marks is about 120 thousandths. Halfway between these marks is then 60 thousandths. So, when we follow the Chevrolet manual procedure and tighten the rocker nut just enough to remove any up and down play of the push rod in a lifter at rest, and then turn the nut one turn, the plunger gets moved 60 thousandths and arrives at the midpoint of the plunger travel where we want it. The middle mark will just be visible at the top of the lifter hole when the gauge is sitting on the plunger, when the plunger is properly preloaded. So there you go. No caliper, no manual needed. Whatever your maker, manufacturer, Ford, Mopar, if they're using hydraulic lifters, they'll have a preloaded plunger spring in there. So you can put that thing right in the middle of the travel with a simple little gauge if you follow what I've just done. Have a nice day and fun in your garage.